Nate had always considered himself a practical man. When Sarah, his wife, was diagnosed with cancer, he tried to handle the situation, but he soon realized the burden was too much. At first, he was by her side during appointments and chemotherapy sessions, but with each passing day, his patience and interest faded. Life, he thought, couldn't stop because of an illness. He began spending more time away from home, using work as an excuse until one night, he made what he believed was an inevitable decision. Nate went to the living room where Sarah was sitting, pale and frail, her hair thinning from treatment. Without preamble, he walked over and said, "Sarah, I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." She looked up at him, confused, trying to process the words she had just heard. "What do you mean, Nate?" she asked weakly. He looked away, unable to meet her gaze. I'm leaving. I can't stay by your side like this. It's destroying me." Sarah felt the floor open beneath her feet. She tried to find words, but the shock was too great. How can you do this to me? Right now?" He sighed, trying to sound rational. "I can't, Sarah. I'm not cut out to live like this. I'm not strong enough. But I need you, Nate. You're my husband. We promised, in sickness and in health." Nate shook his head impatiently. "I know, Sarah, but this is too much. I'm not the person you think I am. I need to live, you understand?" With tears streaming down her face, Sarah simply watched him grab his bags and leave, leaving her alone with her pain and the uncertainty of the future. The loneliness that fell upon Sarah was overwhelming. She felt abandoned and betrayed, but gradually found strength in unexpected places. The hospital staff and a few close friends began supporting her, helping her through the hardest days. Over time, Sarah began to turn her pain into determination, refusing to be defined by her illness or Nate's abandonment. Months later, to everyone's surprise, Sarah began responding positively to treatment. Her oncologist grew more optimistic with each visit. "Sarah, you're a fighter. I'm sure we're going to beat this together," he said, smiling encouragingly. And, indeed, after a year of battles, Sarah received the long-awaited news. She was in remission. The news of Sarah's remission quickly spread among her close friends and family. Some were sincerely happy for her, while others just shook their heads, recalling how Nate had abandoned her. However, Sarah wanted to focus on her recovery, not on the wounds left by those who chose to leave. She learned to lean on the people who truly mattered and decided to start her life anew. This was a second chance, and she was determined to make the most of it. After months of treatment and recovery, Sarah, now stronger and full of energy, decided to sell the house she had shared with Nate. That house held too many memories, and she wanted a fresh start. With the money from the sale and her lawyer's help, Sarah bought a small apartment in San Francisco, a city she'd always wanted to explore. This was her way of turning the page, leaving the past behind. Meanwhile, Nate's life hadn't gone as well as he'd imagined after abandoning her. In the first few months, he felt a sense of freedom, as if he'd escaped a responsibility that was suffocating him. He threw himself into work, but eventually realized something was missing. In his attempts to distract himself, he spent money on trips, cars, and parties, hoping to fill the emptiness he felt. But none of those things brought him the peace he was searching for. One night, at a party, Nate received an unexpected call from an unknown number. With the noise around him, he could barely hear the voice on the other end. "Hello? Who is this?" he yelled, trying to step away from the noise. "Nate? It's me, Sarah." He froze, stunned. "Sarah, is that you? Are you okay?" Sarah's voice, now firm and calm, took him by surprise. "Yes, Nate, I'm fine. I just called to let you know that I'm recovering. In fact, I'm in remission." That's incredible, Sarah," he said, genuinely surprised and a bit unsettled. "I'm happy for you." "Thank you, Nate," she replied calmly. "I appreciate your happiness, but this doesn't change what happened between us. I just thought you should know." There was an unexpected strength in her voice, a confidence he didn't recognize. He tried to continue the conversation, but Sarah quickly ended it, saying she had another engagement. After the call, Nate felt unsettled, bothered by something he couldn't quite define. Trying to shake the growing sense of regret, he returned to the party. Yet, the parties and the company of noob friends no longer held the same appeal. Time passed, and he realized he couldn't escape the weight of his choices. Then, one day, Nate found a letter from Sarah's lawyer in his mailbox. The formal envelope bore his full name, leaving him intrigued. Upon opening it, he found a notice informing him of the passing of Sarah's father and how it would impact the future. According to the document, Sarah had inherited a substantial amount of money and properties, including a vacation home in Napa Valley. As he realized what this meant, Nate felt a mix of surprise and regret. It was an inheritance that, during their marriage, he would have shared with her. The fortune could have changed their lives together, but now, it was entirely in Sarah's hands. He felt irrevocably excluded from the life she was rebuilding without him. Trying to mask his frustration, Nate decided to look for her in person. Days after receiving the letter, Nate found himself standing in front of the building where Sarah had moved in San Francisco. He was nervous, taking several deep breaths before finally entering. It had been so long since he'd last seen her, and he had no idea how she'd react to seeing him. Would she forgive him? Was there still some spark left between them? When he reached Sarah's floor, his heart pounded. He approached her door and rang the bell. A few seconds later, the door opened, and there she was. Sarah looked different. Her hair, which he had seen thinning from chemotherapy, was now short, wavy, and healthy. Her skin had a new glow, a calmness he didn't recognize. She raised her eyebrows in surprise at the sight of him. "Nate? What are you doing here?" He gave a nervous smile, struggling to find the right words. "Sarah, I just wanted to see how you were doing since we last talked." She studied him for a moment, hesitant, before opening the door a bit wider and letting him in. "Well, you're seeing it," she replied with a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm doing well, better than ever, actually." I heard about your inheritance," Nate said, glancing around her apartment meaningfully. "I'm sorry about your father." Sarah flinched at the mention of the inheritance but maintained her composure. "Thank you, Nate. It was a great loss, but it taught me a lot. Today, I have more clarity about what I want in my life." Nate noticed that Sarah spoke directly, without the sweetness he remembered. This newfound firmness made her more appealing, and unconsciously, he felt a desire to try to rebuild what he had destroyed. "Sarah, I've been thinking about everything. About us. I made a lot of mistakes, I know," he said, trying to appear sincere. "Maybe we could, start over? Now that you're well, and with everything you inherited, I think we could have a fresh start. Maybe I could help you manage it all." Sarah interrupted him with a short, incredulous laugh, shaking her head. "Nate, do you really think I want to start over with you?" She looked at him, her eyes shining with a determination that made him shrink. "After everything you did? You left me alone at the hardest moment of my life. And now, after hearing about an inheritance, you show up with this proposal." He swallowed, feeling exposed and humiliated. Nate wasn't used to seeing her this strong and confident. Even so, he wasn't ready to give up. "Sarah, I was lost. I know I was a coward, but I've changed. Give me a chance to show I can be different." He took a step forward, trying to hold her hand, but Sarah stepped back. "No, Nate," she said firmly. "I spent a long time rebuilding my life without you. I earned this peace on my own, and it's too late for you to be a part of it. My inheritance." She gave a bitter smile. "That was never the main point. The main point was that, when I needed you the most, you turned your back. And now, honestly, I'm grateful for that." Nate felt paralyzed. He hadn't expected such a definitive response. He looked around, taking in how much Sarah had changed and how out of place he seemed here. "So, this is it?" he murmured with a last glimmer of hope. "Yes, Nate, this is it," she said, meeting his gaze. "You made your choice, and I made mine. It's time for you to move on." The pain of rejection hit hard, and Nate realized that, this time, Sarah was truly out of his reach. He took one last look at her, trying to capture the image of someone who was now unreachable. Without another word, he turned and left, hearing the door close firmly behind him. As he walked down the stairs, Nate felt the weight of defeat settle on his shoulders. Sarah was no longer the vulnerable woman he had known. She had become someone strong, and it left him feeling lost, with no control over her future. The encounter with Nate left Sarah with a mix of emotions echoing in her mind, but as she walked away from that cafe, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was as if she had finally left behind a ghost from her past. Nate was no longer part of her life, and she now had the freedom to move forward without looking back. A few days later, Sarah received a letter from a New York law firm informing her about her father's full inheritance inventory. Besides the properties she already knew she had inherited, the letter mentioned an investment fund worth much more than she had anticipated. This fund was tied to a tech company her father had invested in years ago, which had appreciated significantly over time. Sarah was now the principal shareholder and had considerable responsibility in determining the company's future. Sitting in her apartment, holding the letter, Sarah felt a mix of disbelief and apprehension. She had never aspired to the corporate world. On the contrary, she preferred a simpler life, far from the businesses that had dominated her father's life. Seeking guidance, she decided to contact the only lawyer her father had trusted, Benjamin Moore, a man known for his integrity. A few days later, Sarah was seated in Benjamin's office, a serious but comforting space. Benjamin greeted her with a warm, genuine smile. "Sarah, it's a pleasure to see you again. I'm truly sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man," he said as they both settled in. "Thank you, Benjamin," Sarah replied, giving a melancholy smile. "I never imagined my father had all this. He was always so discreet about his investments, and now it feels like I'm suddenly responsible for these huge decisions." Benjamin nodded, understanding. "Your father always thought a lot about the future, Sarah. He knew you might not want to be involved in the business, but he prepared everything so you'd have the support you need if you chose to be. This particular company is very promising, but I understand it involves complex commitments." Sarah sighed, looking out the office window at the New York skyline, feeling the weight of this new responsibility. "I don't know, Benjamin. My entire life was focused on simpler things. This inheritance, and now the company. It's a completely new world for me. I don't know where to start." Benjamin placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, you don't have to make any decisions now. Let's take it one step at a time. We can arrange meetings with the company's executives and understand how everything works. Your father trusted that you could handle this, and I'll be here to support you every step of the way." Sarah felt a pang of gratitude for Benjamin's patience and support. She knew that, with the right guidance, she might be able to turn what once felt like a burden into a new opportunity. However, her return to the corporate world did not go unnoticed. People she hadn't seen in years began reaching out, showing sudden interest in rekindling friendships or offering help. While cautious, Sarah couldn't entirely avoid being contacted by Nate again. One day, while reviewing documents in Benjamin's office, she received a message from Nate, asking to speak with her. Sarah hesitated but, after some thought, replied with a brief, "I'm busy. I don't need anything." Still, Nate insisted, claiming he was facing financial difficulties and needed support. Reading his message, Sarah felt her heart tighten but quickly steeled her resolve. He wasn't looking for reconciliation, she thought. He was after money. Balancing reason with compassion, she decided to talk to him only to make it clear that she would not be his lifeline. 2 days later, Sarah and Nate met at a quiet cafe in downtown San Francisco. When he arrived, Sarah noticed that time and hardship had left visible marks on his face. He was thinner, with deep circles under his eyes, and an expression of defeat he couldn't quite hide. "Sarah, thank you for meeting with me," Nate said in a vulnerable tone she'd never heard from him before. She nodded, keeping her face neutral. "I'm here, Nate. But let's be direct. What do you want?" Nate took a deep breath, a little hesitant, before responding. I made a lot of mistakes, Sarah. I thought I could handle everything on my own, but the truth is, my life has fallen apart since I left you. And now I have nothing. I need a second chance. I need help to start over. Sarah looked at him, expressionless. "And why do you think I should help you, Nate? You left me when I was at rock bottom, remember?" He looked away, ashamed. I know I was a coward. I have no excuses. I just thought that maybe, now that things have changed for you, you could give me a chance." She laughed, but without humor. "Things changed for me because I fought for myself, Nate. I went through all this alone, and I learned to get back up without needing you. And now you want me to forget everything you did." Nate looked defeated, but with one last thread of hope, he said, "I'm not asking you to forget, Sarah. Just to forgive. I really regret it." Sarah stayed silent, feeling the weight of the decision. Although a part of her still felt a trace of compassion, her reason told her to stand firm. It wasn't fair that now, as she had finally rebuilt her life, he was trying to insert himself back into it, especially with the same intentions of taking advantage of the security she had achieved. "Nate, I can't help you," she finally said, her voice calm but firm. "You made your choices, and I made mine. My choice was to move forward without you, and that's what I'm going to keep doing." He lowered his head, defeated, unable to find any more words. "I hope you find a way to start over, Nate, but it won't be at my expense," Sarah concluded, standing up and preparing to leave. Before walking out, she cast one last look at him, a look that mixed compassion and determination. She knew that this was the final end to any ties that might still have existed between them. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself at the center of an intense phase in her life. She threw herself fully into the responsibilities of the company, with the support of Benjamin and a team of consultants who explained every detail of the business to her. Gradually, she began to feel more comfortable in her role as the major shareholder, surprised at the strength and confidence emerging as she understood the impact of her decisions. One day, in a meeting with the executive team, Sarah met a key figure in the company, Thomas Kendall, the chief financial officer. Thomas was a middle-aged man with a firm posture and an attentive look. As soon as he began to speak, he was direct. "Sarah, I know this is a transition phase for you, and I admire your dedication. We need to discuss the next steps to expand operations. With your support, we can make this company a real leader in the industry." Sarah noticed that Thomas was watching her with a mix of respect and curiosity. Even though she was new to that world, she felt the intensity of his words and the seriousness in his eyes. He genuinely seemed to believe in the potential of the company and the importance of her role there. "I understand, Thomas," Sarah replied, keeping a professional but interested tone. "I want to explore all the possibilities to make this happen. My father believed in this company, and now I believe in it too." After the meeting, Thomas approached to congratulate her on her performance and offered his support whenever she needed it. His unexpected kindness and professionalism comforted her. There was someone who seemed genuinely on her side. In the days that followed, the two began working together frequently, discussing strategies and planning the next steps. One afternoon, while Sarah was reviewing documents in her office, her phone buzzed with a message. When she looked at the screen, she was surprised to see a photo of herself and Thomas together at a restaurant, accompanied by a brief, threatening text. "Be careful who you trust, Sarah. Not everyone is on your side." She froze, feeling a chill run down her spine. Who could be taking pictures of her in such a private moment? And, more importantly, why? Thomas noticed the tense expression on her face and asked, "Is everything all right, Sarah?" She hesitated, trying to find the words. "I think so. I just received a strange message." Thomas frowned, intrigued. "What kind of message?" Sarah showed him her phone, and Thomas looked at the photo with a somber expression. He sighed and shook his head. "It looks like someone is trying to intimidate you. It could be a competitor who doesn't like the idea of new leadership. Unfortunately, this isn't uncommon in our field." Sarah tried to swallow her anxiety, but Thomas's words only made her more uneasy. "I didn't expect to deal with this kind of thing. I never thought the corporate world would be so hostile," she murmured, visibly disturbed. Thomas placed a comforting hand on hers. "Look, Sarah, you're not alone. Whoever is behind this, we'll find out. And you have Benjamin and me to support you through it all right?" Sarah nodded, forcing a smile. But as she tried to reassure herself, she knew the message was a warning. Someone, somewhere, was paying far too much attention to her and seemed determined to intimidate her. In the following days, Sarah's life turned into a kind of psychological game. The anonymous messages continued, each one more threatening than the last. Along with photos, explicit text started to appear. "Know who you're with, Sarah, or not everyone around you is trustworthy." Despite her fear, Sarah tried to keep up her routine at the company, but the pressure was affecting her sleep and focus. Concerned, she decided to consult Benjamin about the situation. In the lawyer's elegant office, Sarah confided in him, feeling the tension build in her chest. "Benjamin, I don't know what to do anymore. The messages won't stop, and it feels like someone is watching me all the time, monitoring me," Sarah said, running her hands over her face, exhausted. Benjamin, visibly worried, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, this is very serious. Someone is trying to destabilize you, and we know the business world can be full of traps. I suggest we hire a private investigator. He can find out who's behind this and ensure your safety." Sarah nodded, relieved to have someone she could trust completely. "Yes, Benjamin, I think you're right. I need to know who's doing this. I can't keep living with this insecurity." Benjamin got up, walked over to his desk, and picked up a business card. "This is the contact information for James Carter, a trusted investigator. He's handled some cases for me in the past and is extremely competent. I'll ask him to start as soon as possible." That same afternoon, Sarah met with the investigator. James Carter was a man with a sharp, discreet look and a serious demeanor that exuded experience. During their meeting, he asked detailed questions about the messages, the people around her, and even about her past with Nate. She answered everything honestly but hesitated when it came to Thomas, her ally at the company. "So, you completely trust Thomas Kendall?" James asked, attentive to her every reaction. She thought for a moment. Thomas had always been supportive, a constant source of encouragement. But as she recalled the messages, she remembered that the first threatening text had a photo of the two of them together. She didn't want to distrust him, but doubts began to creep in. I think so. He's always been by my side since I got here. But it's true that I haven't known him for long." James made a note in his pad. "I understand. We'll keep all possibilities open. The important thing is to keep an open mind. I'll investigate everyone around you, but discreetly. And if necessary, I'll be on standby to ensure your personal safety." In the days that followed, Sarah felt like she was being watched at all times. Yet, James's and his team's presence comforted her. He installed additional security cameras in her apartment and discreetly monitored communications to track down any leads on the sender of the messages. One night, while reviewing documents at home, Sarah received a call from an unknown number. Her heart raced as she answered, but the voice on the other end was calm and firm. "Good evening, Sarah. It's James. We need to talk. I've discovered something." His grave tone sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Of course, James. What did you find? I don't want to talk over the phone. Can we meet in a safe place? Tomorrow morning, at the park near your office. Sarah agreed, and the night that followed was long and restless. She barely slept, imagining who could be behind the threats and what the true reason was behind it all. The next morning, Sarah met James at the designated spot. He wore a serious, concerned expression. Sarah, after days of investigation, we managed to trace some of the messages and, surprisingly, they were sent from a computer inside the company. More specifically, from a restricted area in the finance team. Sarah paled at hearing that. The direct connection to the finance department made her think immediately of Thomas. But he wouldn't do that, would he? I know what you're thinking, Sarah, James said, as if reading her thoughts. We don't yet know if it's Thomas himself or someone in the department trying to destabilize you and frame him. It's too early to draw conclusions, but you need to be aware that he might indeed be involved. Sarah felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. The idea seemed surreal, but at the same time, everything was starting to make sense. Thomas might have been seeking some advantage, perhaps trying to weaken her to take control of company decisions. And what do I do now, James? She asked, her voice nearly a whisper, struggling to stay calm. James looked at her seriously. Continue as you are. Don't confront Thomas. I need a few more days to gather concrete evidence. Just act naturally. If he realizes we're investigating, he might anticipate and make things harder. Sarah nodded, but the idea of continuing to work closely with Thomas while suspecting him sent chills down her spine. Returning to the office that afternoon, she had to mask her emotions while working beside Thomas, who was as attentive as ever. Sarah, you seem a bit tired. Is everything okay? He asked, with a concerned look. She forced a smile and shook her head. Just a sleepless night, nothing major. But thanks for asking, Thomas. While feigning calm, Sarah felt the weight of the secret she now carried. From that day forward, Sarah maintained a calm and professional front, despite the whirlwind of thoughts tormenting her. She knew every word and every gesture would be observed by Thomas, if he was truly involved. Even so, his closeness became increasingly unbearable. Every time he offered help or showed concern, Sarah felt a chill, wondering if that kindness was just a facade concealing darker intentions. Meanwhile, James continued his discreet investigation. On the third day after the initial discovery, he managed to recover some images from internal security cameras in the company, showing someone accessing the finance department's computer in the middle of the night. However, the person in the recordings was wearing a hat and a mask, making identification difficult. The next morning, James called Sarah with another discovery. Sarah, we managed to identify something important. This person we saw on the cameras, using the finance department's computer. Well, they used an access card that belongs to Thomas. Sarah's stomach turned. The possibility she had been trying to ignore now seemed more likely than ever. James, does this confirm that Thomas is the one responsible? She asked, her voice trembling. We're not certain yet if it was him personally or if someone used his card. It could be an attempt to incriminate him or, worse, he might be directly involved. I'll need more time to trace Thomas's activities more specifically. With a lump in her throat, Sarah agreed. Deep down, she still clung to a small hope that it was all a misunderstanding, but reality was becoming increasingly ruthless. That same night, Sarah organized an emergency meeting with Benjamin and James at her apartment. She needed a strategy. She didn't know how much longer she could keep working alongside someone who might be sabotaging her life and career. Benjamin, always cautious, suggested, Sarah, given what we know so far, it's best that you avoid any direct confrontation with Thomas. We don't want him suspecting anything before we have indisputable evidence. You need to stay in control and keep acting normally. But, for how long? Sarah asked, feeling frustration build. It's hard for me to deal with him, knowing all this. James, who had been silent until then, looked at her seriously. Sarah, I know it's hard, but we're close to a solution. I'm monitoring all of Thomas's financial transactions and calls. We'll find out who's behind this, and if he's guilty, we'll have enough evidence to remove him from your life and from the company." In the following days, Sarah followed Benjamin and James's advice, keeping up the appearance of calm. She pretended not to notice Thomas's calculated actions, who continued to show his support more insistently. It was as if he was trying to reaffirm his influence over her, and Sarah, though exhausted, played the role of confident boss, keeping Thomas comfortable while James's plan unfolded. Finally, after an intense week, James called her with the news she had been anxiously waiting for. "Sarah, we have the evidence. Thomas is directly involved. He's been embezzling funds from the company and using your name to cover up illegal transactions. We also traced the anonymous messages to a device belonging to him. Now we have everything we need to confront him." Sarah felt a mix of relief and anger hearing those words. The man she had trusted, who had called himself her ally, had been sabotaging her life all along. "And now, James? How should we proceed?" she asked, regaining control of her breathing. "The next step is to expose him to the board. We need to present this evidence so he has no way to defend himself. Tomorrow morning, Benjamin and I will be by your side. We'll organize an extraordinary board meeting and reveal everything." That night, Sarah could barely sleep. She spent hours imagining what she would say, how she would confront Thomas in front of everyone. He had been someone she trusted deeply, someone she had almost considered a friend. Now, however, all that remained was the bitter taste of betrayal. The next morning, the extraordinary meeting was held. Entering the room, Sarah saw the board members already seated, whispering among themselves, curious about the reason for the meeting. Thomas arrived shortly after, looking confident and relaxed, unaware of what was about to unfold. Benjamin was the first to speak, formally explaining the situation. "We called this meeting to address a very serious issue involving integrity and financial security," he said, looking directly at Thomas. "In recent weeks, Sarah has been the target of threats and sabotage, with anonymous messages and attempts at intimidation." Thomas frowned in surprise, looking at Sarah with a mask of concern. "Sarah, why didn't you tell me about this?" he asked, his tone seeming genuinely worried. But Sarah was no longer fooled. She remained firm and answered, looking him straight in the eye. "I didn't tell you because I was waiting for the right moment. And now is that moment, Thomas." With a nod, Benjamin signaled James to project the evidence onto the meeting room screen. Everyone watched as the fraudulent transactions were exposed, directly linking Thomas to the illegal activities and anonymous messages. Thomas's expression shifted from surprise to desperation, and he tried to defend himself, but the evidence was irrefutable. He was cornered, with no way out. "This is absurd. I can explain," he said, his voice revealing his growing panic. But Sarah interrupted him, her tone firm and final. "There's no explanation, Thomas. You abused my trust, tried to sabotage my father's company, and attempted to intimidate me. Your plan is over." Before the board, Thomas lost his composure, unable to sustain his lies. The board members, horrified, decided to terminate him immediately and initiated a formal investigation into all the frauds he had committed. At the end of the meeting, as security escorted Thomas out of the company, Sarah felt the weight of that nightmare finally dissipate. She had won a battle not only for the company but for her own peace. Alongside Benjamin and James, Sarah left the boardroom with a sense of victory but also a bitter lesson about trust. Now, she knew that even in the darkest situations, she had the strength and courage to face any adversity. Over the months following Thomas's removal, Sarah finally felt that the company atmosphere was lighter, but there was still a long way to go. The revelations of fraud had left some board members skeptical about the company's future leadership. Additionally, the media began speculating about internal scandals, which required a firm and transparent response from the company. Sarah knew she would have to prove that she was capable of running the business with integrity and stability. In the days that followed, she called a series of meetings to outline restructuring and recovery plans. Benjamin and James were by her side, providing support and guidance. Determined to face any shadow of doubt about her leadership, Sarah decided to hold a press conference to clarify the actions the company would take from that point forward. On the day of the conference, the auditorium was packed with journalists. Sarah walked onto the stage with a steady posture, and Benjamin, seated in the audience, gave her a discreet nod of support. As she sat at the microphone, she looked at the crowd of reporters, knowing that each of her words would be scrutinized. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady. "I want to be absolutely transparent about what has happened over the past few months. We were victims of a fraudulent scheme conducted by someone who, until recently, held a position of trust within our company." She paused, observing the attentive expressions of the journalists. "This situation has deeply affected us, but I want to assure everyone that we are taking all necessary measures to correct mistakes and protect the interests of our clients and shareholders. I personally commit to restructuring our operations and ensuring that our company becomes an example of ethics and transparency in the industry." Questions immediately followed, and Sarah responded with clarity and sincerity. The journalists didn't hold back from asking about her relationship with Thomas, her lack of experience in the sector, and even her personal life. Although some questions were uncomfortable, Sarah maintained a firm and composed tone, aware that this was a crucial test. At the end of the conference, when the last journalist left, Sarah felt a wave of exhaustion. But at the same time, she was proud. She had faced everything with her head held high, without hesitation. Later that day, Benjamin visited her in her office to talk. "Sarah, you were brilliant today," he said, with a sincere smile. "You not only earned the team's respect, but you also gained the press's trust. They could see who you truly are." She sighed, relieved. "I hope so, Benjamin. But honestly, all of this has made me reflect a lot. I need to understand what I really want for myself and for this company. I want to honor my father's legacy, but I feel like I'm still searching for my own path." Benjamin nodded, understanding. "And that's the best decision you can make, Sarah. You don't need to have all the answers now. Just keep steady, building with integrity. Your father would be proud." Hearing those words, Sarah felt a surge of pride and responsibility. She wasn't just managing a company, she was building an identity, strengthening herself as an independent and capable woman. That night, while reflecting on everything she had experienced since her father's death, Sarah made a decision. She picked up the phone and scheduled a meeting with all the company directors for the next day. She knew that changes needed to be made, not only in terms of internal processes but also in the organizational culture. The following day, the meeting took place in a serious but hopeful atmosphere. Sarah looked at each director with confidence and announced, "Today we're beginning a new phase. I want this company to be an example of ethics, transparency, and innovation. But, above all, I want it to be a place where everyone feels valued and respected. The changes start now, and I count on each of you to make this possible." The directors, surprised and inspired, nodded with respect and admiration. Many of them had grown accustomed to her father's tough and relentless leadership, but now they saw something new, a leadership that combined firmness with humanity. After that meeting, Sarah began implementing a series of internal changes, focusing on creating a culture of trust and collaboration. Gradually, the company started transforming, and the impact of these actions began to show in the results. The following months brought growth and innovation to the company. Sarah was finally earning the market's respect, but, above all, she was gaining respect for herself. With the passage of months, Sarah finally felt in control of her life. Under her leadership, the company thrived, the finances were balanced, and the reputation was beginning to recover. She had undergone a long and painful process of self-discovery and strengthening, but now she could see the fruits of her labor. Her father's company was not just a legacy, it was her own achievement. One sunny morning, Sarah received a letter from Benjamin's law office. Confused, she opened the envelope and found a document that appeared to be a contract for the purchase of a small property in Napa Valley. As she read, her expression changed. The property was the house where she and her father had spent many summers during her childhood, a place full of precious memories that he had sold when facing financial difficulties. At the bottom of the document, a brief note from Benjamin explained everything. "Sarah, I found an opportunity to buy the house back. I thought it might be something you'd like to have again." Finishing the note, a single tear rolled down her face. It felt as though the universe was gradually returning each fragment of her life that had been broken. Without hesitation, she signed the papers and decided to visit the house in Napa over the weekend. She needed to see the place, reconnect with the memories of her father, and perhaps, once and for all, close a chapter. On Saturday, Sarah drove to Napa Valley. The road was lined with vineyards and soft hills, and as she approached the house, she was overwhelmed by a deep sense of nostalgia. When she parked, she looked at the house's exterior, which, though a bit worn over time, still held the same essence. She opened the door and stepped inside, smelling the faint scent of wood and memories. As she walked through the rooms, memories of her childhood surfaced. Her father's laughter, his advice on life, the promises they made to each other. It was as if he was there, accompanying her with every step. She went through every corner of the house until she found an old photo album on one of the shelves. Sitting on the couch, Sarah began leafing through it, smiling at the memories of simpler, happier days. In the middle of the photos, she found a folded letter, apparently written by her father. With her heart racing, she opened it and read, "My dear Sarah, if you ever find this letter, it's because life has somehow brought you back to this place. I wanted you to know that everything I did was with you and your future in mind. I know that when I'm gone, you'll have the challenge of keeping this legacy, but I want you to always remember, your true worth lies in who you are, not what you own. Be strong, be fair, and never lose compassion. This is the greatest legacy you can build. With love, Dad." Sarah took a deep breath, holding the letter to her chest. Silent tears streamed down her face, but this time they weren't of sadness, they were of peace. She felt grateful to have rediscovered not only the house but also a part of herself. Walking out to the garden, she looked at the horizon, with mountains in the distance and a clear sky above. For the first time in a long time, she felt her heart at peace. She understood that everything she had gone through, the betrayals, the fears, the challenges, had shaped her into the woman she was now. Standing there in that garden, Sarah made a silent promise to her father and to herself. She would honor the name he had left her, but above all, she would build her own story, her own legacy, with the strength, integrity, and humanity he had taught her. With a light heart and a steady gaze, Sarah returned to her car. She knew the future would still bring challenges, but now she was certain she was ready to face them, not just as an heir, but as the true leader of her own life. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror one last time at the house, smiling as she realized she was finally free to move forward. Over the following months, Sarah felt, at last, that her life was truly her own. Under her leadership, the company thrived, finances were balanced, and its reputation was gradually being restored. She had endured a long, grueling journey of self-discovery and growth, but now she could see the rewards of her efforts. Her father's company was not merely a legacy, it was a testament to her own resilience and achievements. One sunny morning, Sarah received a letter from Benjamin's law office. Curious, she opened the envelope and found a document that looked like a purchase contract for a small property in Napa Valley. As she read, her expression changed. The property was the house where she and her father had spent many summers in her childhood, a place filled with cherished memories, but sold during a period of financial hardship. At the bottom of the document, a brief note from Benjamin explained everything. "Sarah, I found an opportunity to buy the house back. I thought it might be something you'd like to have once more." A single tear rolled down her face as she finished reading the note. It felt as if the universe was slowly giving back every broken piece of her past. Without hesitation, She signed the papers and decided to visit the house in Napa that weekend. She needed to see that place, to reconnect with her memories of her father, and perhaps to close a chapter of her life for good. On Saturday, Sarah drove out to Napa Valley. The road was lined with vineyards and gentle hills, and as she neared the house, she felt a wave of nostalgia. When she parked and took in the sight of the house, its exterior worn but still familiar, it was like stepping back in time. She opened the door and entered, immediately enveloped by the faint, comforting smell of wood and memories. As she walked through the rooms, fragments of her childhood returned vividly. Her father's laughter, his gentle advice, the promises they'd made to each other. It was as if he were there, guiding her through each step. She wandered through every corner of the house until she found an old photo album on one of the shelves. Sitting on the couch, Sarah began flipping through its pages, smiling at the memories of simpler, happier days. In the middle of the album, she discovered a folded letter, apparently written by her father. With her heart racing, she opened it and began to read. "My dear Sarah, if you're reading this, then life has somehow brought you back to this place. I wanted you to know that everything I did for you, for your future. I know that when I'm gone, you'll face the challenge of keeping our legacy, but always remember, your true worth lies in who you are, not in what you own. Be strong, be fair, and never lose your compassion. That is the greatest legacy you can build. With love, Dad." Sarah pressed the letter to her chest, tears silently streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of peace. She felt grateful, not only for finding the house again, but for rediscovering a part of herself. Stepping out into the garden, she gazed at the horizon, with mountains in the distance and a clear sky above. For the first time in a long time, her heart felt at ease. She understood that everything she had been through, the betrayals, the fears, the struggles, had shaped her into the woman she had become. Standing in that garden, Sarah made a silent promise to her father and to herself. She would honor the name he left her, but above all, she would build her own story, her own legacy, with the strength, integrity, and humanity he had taught her. With a heart that felt lighter and a gaze that felt steadier, Sarah returned to her car. She knew that the future would still hold challenges, but now she was certain she was ready to face them, not merely as an heir but as the true leader of her own life. As she drove away, she glanced back at the house in her rearview mirror one last time, smiling as she realized she was finally free to move forward.